Mara?
Don't.
Look at me.
Please, just walk past me.
12 years, and you're loading my trucks.
87 days.
87 days of what?
If you say my name, I lose him.
Lose who? This is from a hospital.
Give it back.
There's a boy on here. He's 11.
Roman, please.
He gave it back. He handed her the envelope, and he did not ask the question. He watched her walk out through the loading doors into the dark. Then he stood on his own warehouse floor and could not move. Roman Ashcroft had built this company on one rule: trust the file. For 12 years, that rule had cost him nothing he could name. You already want to know who that boy belongs to. Subscribe so the answer finds you. Back to the floor of that warehouse. The Ashcroft Distribution Group moved 40,000 cartons, a night out of Draycott, Indiana. It had 1,100 employees. Roman knew perhaps 40 of them by name. He was 45. He had run the company since he was 34. People who worked for him said he was fair. They said it carefully, the way people describe weather they have learned to dress for. The night shift started at 9 and broke at 5:30. He had come at 5 because the numbers on line 3 had been soft for a month. He wanted to see the floor himself. The shift supervisor caught up with him by the racking. "Sir, nobody told us you were coming." Nobody was supposed to. The man fell into step beside him. "Is there a problem with 3? "There's a problem with the throughput on 3. "That's a headcount thing, Mr. Ashcroft. We're too short every night this month." Roman stopped walking. "Then why is 3 the only vine hitting its number?" The supervisor put his hands in his pockets. "Honestly, one of the temps. She does about a shift and a half." "Which one?" He nodded down the aisle without looking. "The one with the back brace. Nights. Every night. She picks up the noon dock when we're short." "Does she have a name?" "They all have names. I'd have to look it up." Roman had already stopped listening. He had seen the bottle. It sat on the steel shelf beside the belt, dented. The way a thing gets dented when it is carried for years. It carried the company mark. Not the current one. The old one. The wordless one. The one they had stopped printing the year he took over. He was looking at that bottle when the woman beside it lifted a carton. The line of her cheek turned him to stone. Now the floor was empty. The belt was still running. He was holding the bottle in his hand. He drove home at 6. His wife was asleep. He did not go up. He went into the study instead and opened the safe. He took out a gray file box he had not touched in 11 years. The lid had a strip of tape across it with a date on it in his own handwriting. He set it on the desk. He did not open it. He sat there while the window went from black to gray. He thought about a boy he had never met who was 11 years old. He thought about a woman he had spent 12 years calling a thief. At 7, he called Dane Whitlock. "It's early." "I know what time it is, Dane." The line was quiet for a second. "Are you at the site?" "I'm at the house." "Come here instead of the office." Dane did not ask why. He had learned when not to. "Should I bring anything?" "Bring the archive credentials." Then he opened the box. 12 years earlier, the company had been half its size, and Roman had been 33, and nobody had called him sir yet. Mara Vandiver worked 2 desks down from him in bid coordination. She was 22. She had come up from the floor, from nights, from exactly the line he had walked that morning. She was quiet in meetings. She was faster than anyone in the room, on paper. The first thing he ever said to her was a complaint about a shipping schedule. The second thing he ever said to her was an apology. They worked a bid together for 9 weeks. On the 9th week, they won it. It was 11 at night and the lights were half off. She looked at the number on the screen and started to cry. He did not know what to do with that. "Why are you crying?" "I don't know." She wiped her face with the back of her wrist and laughed at herself. "I'm just glad. That's all it is. People are usually glad in a different way. I've never won anything." He sat down on the edge of the desk. "You didn't win it. You built it. That's worse." She blew her nose on a napkin from somebody's desk. "How is that worse?" "Because now they'll expect me to do it again." He married her 14 months later at a courthouse with 9 people in the room. Her mother was dead. Her father did not come. His own mother came and stood and did not sit down until the clerk asked her to. Eleanor Ashcroft was 60 then. She had grown the company out of a single leased dock with her husband. Then she had buried him and kept going. She had a way of asking a question that was not a question. What does her family do? She doesn't have one. Roman straightened his cuff. That isn't an answer, Roman. It's the only one there is. Eleanor smiled at the clerk. She signed where she was told to sign. She said nothing else about it for 2 years. She did not have to. Mara heard it anyway. In the small ways it came. The seat at the far end of the table. The coat taken and hung without a word. They lived in a rented duplex for the first year because Mara would not let him buy anything. She kept working. She kept her own name on the nights he came home late. She left a bowl on the stove and a note under it, and the note never said more than a few words. He kept some of them. He did not know why. Then the spring came when the overseas group put out the tender, and everything in the company turned toward one number, and the two of them stopped eating at the same time of day. That was the spring the bid documents went out the door. The call came on a Tuesday. A competitor had priced the contract 3 days before the deadline, and priced it to the decimal, and there was only one way that happened. Information security took 9 days. The report came back on a Thursday afternoon, and it came back with her name on it. There were 3 things in it. The first was a login, her credentials, her badge, a Sunday at 4 in the morning, a terminal on the 4th floor she had no reason to be near. The second was a drive, a small silver one found in the back of her desk drawer, under a box of staples, carrying the full bid package. The third was money, $2 million, wired into an account in her name from a company nobody had heard of. 11 days before the leak. Roman read the report twice, and then he shouted at a man who had not done anything wrong. He did not believe it. He wanted somebody to tell him the room was wrong. Nobody did. They sat in the 4th floor boardroom on the Friday. The sun came through the glass wall. There were 3 stacks of paper on the table, and the drive sat on top of them like a paperweight. She sat. He stood. You think I sold you out? I don't think. I read the file. Then read my face. He did not look up. I'm looking at the evidence. She did not cry, and she did not raise her voice. Ask me one more time. I've asked you. Then ask me like you want the answer. He did not. She asked him once more the following day, and he gave her the same words. And after that, she stopped asking. His mother came the following week and stood in their kitchen with her coat still on. I said this at the beginning, Mother. I said it, and you told me it was the only answer there was. Mara was standing at the counter with her back to both of them. She did not turn around. She did not defend herself once, in that kitchen or in any room after it. Roman told himself later that the silence had been the proof. It was the thing he came back to whenever the doubt got in. She never fought it. And innocent people fight. He signed the separation agreement 11 days later. There was no argument about money. She took nothing. On the last morning he came home, and the closet was empty. The drawer in the bathroom was empty. On the kitchen table, there was a single sheet of paper, with her signature at the bottom. Above the signature, she had written 2 words, "Be well." He read it standing up, with his coat on. And what he felt was not grief. It was anger. It stayed anger for a very long time. Dane Whitlock had been chief of staff for 9 years. He arrived at 7:40 with 2 coffees. He found his employer sitting in front of an open file box. Pull the personnel record for a night shift temp on line 3. Vandiver. Dane wrote it down. He did not ask why. And the file on the bid leak. Not the summary. Everything. That one he wrote down more slowly. The file from 12 years ago. Yes. Dane looked at the box on the desk, and then at the man behind it. May I ask what changed? No. All right. He closed the notebook. For what it's worth, the archive is off-site. It'll be tomorrow. Then it's tomorrow. 40 minutes east, in a hospital. Corridor. Mara Vandiver was sitting with her coat still on. She had come straight from the shift. She always did on Thursdays. Jonah was 11. He had been born with a narrowing in the valve on the left side of his heart. He had been repaired once at 4. The repair had a lifespan, and the lifespan was over. The cardiologist had said it plainly in March. 8 months. 12 if he's slow about growing. She had written the number on her hand. He isn't slow about anything. No, he isn't. The surgery had a number attached to it. The number was not the problem. The problem was the plan. The plan she could get at her wage. Covered a hospital bed, and almost nothing that happened in it. There was one plan in the county that covered the whole procedure, and the follow-up, and the years after it. It belonged to the company that ran the distribution center out on Route 9. Full-time employees were eligible. Temporary staff converted at 90 days. She had counted it out on the back of an envelope in February. 90 shifts. Then the coverage started. Then the surgeon could book him. She had applied under her own name. A false one would have failed the background check. She had gambled that in a company of 1,100 people. Nobody looks at a temp on nights. For 86 days, nobody had. Jonah came out of the exam room, carrying his own paperwork, because he liked to carry it. He sat down next to her and put his heels on the rung of the chair. Did he say anything new? He said, "You're boring." The boy grinned at the folder in his lap. Boring is good. That's what you always say, because it's true. He turned the folder over twice. Mom, is it still Thursday? The Thursday after next. She kept her eyes on the corridor. It's still Thursday. Okay. He rubbed the side of his nose with one knuckle, the way he did when he was thinking. She looked away because she could not watch him do that. She got him a sandwich from the machine, and they ate it in the corridor. You smell like cardboard. That's what work smells like. He considered this seriously, the way he considered everything. Does it ever smell like anything else? Sometimes it smells like diesel. That's worse. That's worse, she agreed. She did not tell him about the morning. She did not tell him that a man had said her name out loud. For the first time in 12 years. Because that was the whole of it. She had 90 days, and she was on 87. The only thing that could take the last 3 away was a man remembering her face. Dane came back the next afternoon. He had a folder and the look of a man who has decided how to say something. She rehired 11 weeks ago. Agency temp, line 3, nights. Under her own name. Under her own name. And under her old employee number. Roman looked up. They kept it? The system did. It never purges. Explain that, Dane. He turned the folder around. She typed her own number into the terminal on her first shift. The system recognized it. It handed her back a badge, a locker, and a starter kit. A starter kit. There's a box in the supply room. Nobody has opened it since the mark changed. That was the bottle. That was why it was old. She had not wandered into his building. She had come back in through a door she already had a key to. Roman set the folder down. He did not touch the coffee. What is she living on? $21 an hour and overtime. That's it? Dane checked the page. There's a boy on the household record. 11. I know about the boy. Dane waited. Roman did not fill the silence. There's something else. You asked for the whole leak file. He put the second folder on the desk. He opened it to a page near the back and turned it around. It was an account trace. Roman had read it before. He had read it in a state that he now understood had not been reading. The $2 million had gone into the account in her name on a Tuesday. It had never come out. 11 days after the deposit, the receiving bank had flagged it. 6 weeks after that, a court order returned. The entire amount to the originating account. She had not spent $1 of it. She had not moved $1 of it. As far as any record showed, she had never once logged in to look at it. Roman read the page 4 times. Say it plainly. The money went in, sat frozen, and went back. She never touched it. And this is in the final report? Dane laid a second page beside the first. It was thinner, older, stamped along one edge. That's the thing. That one's the interim. Same investigator, same case, 10 days earlier. Where's the return? Page 3. Right where it should be. He tapped the first page. In the final, it isn't anywhere. Not summarized. Not footnoted. Not contradicted. Removed. Removed. The room was very quiet. Somewhere below them, a truck backed up to a dock. The beeping came up through the floor. Could that be an error? An error drops a line. Dane closed the folder. This is a whole finding with its cross-references cleaned out behind it. So somebody took it out. Somebody took it out. Roman stood and went to the window. He stood there with his hands at his sides. Nobody in that building knew what was missing from page 3 of a 12-year-old report. Everything after this turned on it. Find the investigator. He left the company the same quarter. Then find him anyway. Vanessa Ashcroft noticed on the second night. She had been married to him for 9 years. She knew the sound of his car coming in at the wrong hour. She knew what it meant when the study door stayed shut. She was 46. Her father was Sterling Holdings. 12 years ago, Sterling Holdings had put $400 million into the group. It took a single week. That was the week the bid was lost, and the banks began to circle. She had never once had to remind anybody of it. It sat in every room she entered. You're up early. Site visit. She watched him find his keys. 3 days running. The numbers on 3 are soft. They were soft last month, too. You sent a memo about it. He kissed her cheek on the way past. She let him. Then she went into the study and stood in front of the safe. She did not have the combination to. She looked at the empty strip of dust on the shelf, where a gray box had sat for 11 years. At 9 that morning, she called the head of human resources directly, which she had never done. She was pleasant about it. I'm sure this isn't my lane. Tell me if it isn't. Not at all, Mrs. Ashcroft. The overseas group are on site in March. Somebody asked me about agency headcount, and I couldn't answer them. Paper moved on the other end of the line. We use 3 agencies. It's about 200 people, and they're screened the same as staff. At intake. Not again after that. She let a moment pass. Would it be strange to rescreen? Before March. It wouldn't be strange. It would be work. She turned a page of nothing at all. Start with the night shifts. That's where the exposure is, isn't it? That's where the headcount is. Then that's what I'd do. She said the word audit twice. She never said a name. Rescreening meant a fresh background. Check on every temporary worker on the site. A fresh check pulled prior employment. Prior employment for one of them would come back with a termination and an internal misconduct finding attached to it. No agency in the state keeps a worker after that. The notice went out to the 4 supervisors on a Wednesday. It was 2 paragraphs long. It named nobody. Mara read it on the board by the time clock at 9 at night. She was standing in her coat with her badge already scanned. She read it twice. Then she went to the supervisor's window. Can I move to the 4 to noon rotation? West building. Nobody asks for West. My son's school schedule changed. He looked at her over the top of the glass. It's a worse shift. I know what it is. He shrugged and moved her. Because nobody argues with a temp who volunteers for the worse one. The West building had no line 3. It had no conveyor at all. It had roller doors and pallet jacks and 140 people who did not know her name. She worked 8 hours with her hood up. That was day 88. He went to the address on the household record on the Friday. It was a half basement on the north end of Draycott, 4 steps down off a street of parked cars. There was a mailbox on the wall. Across the mailbox, somebody had put a strip of masking tape with a name written on it in pen. He stood at the bottom of the steps for a while before he knocked. She opened the door with the chain on. Please go. I've read the account, Trace. I know what's in the file. He put a hand flat on the door frame. The money came back. All of it. In 6 weeks. She did not move. Then you know I didn't spend it. I know you never had it. That isn't the same thing. She said it quietly. She said it like a person who had had 12 years to find the right sentence. Mr. Ashcroft, if somebody sees your car on this street, I lose the last 2 days. He heard the word Mr., and it went through him. 2 days of what? She shut the door. He did not knock again. He climbed 2 steps and stopped, because through the door, from somewhere on the other side of that wall, came a sound. It was the sound a person makes when they have taught themselves not to make it. Breath held and let out wrong. A hand over a mouth. He stood on the concrete steps of a rented basement and listened. It was the sound a person makes after waiting a very long time for somebody to come. Then he went up to the street and sat in the car and did not start it. Now, before we go on, if you're still with me, do me one small thing. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I like knowing how far this one travels. All right, back to that street. He sat there until the light went out behind the basement window. He had come to tell her that he knew. He drove away understanding that he had told her nothing she needed, and that there was a clock running somewhere in her life that he could not see the face of. Perry Slocum ran a 4-man IT shop in a strip mall 2 hours south. He had been the information security analyst who signed the leak report. He denied everything for 11 minutes. Then Dane put the interim report and the final report side by side on the counter and turned them both to page 3 and said nothing at all. And Perry Slocum sat down on a stool by the register and put his hands over his face. I want it on record that I've kept it. 12 years. That has to count. Kept what? All of it. What he had kept was in a fire safe in his garage. Why keep any of it? Because I was the cheapest part of the arrangement. Dane waited him out. Meaning what? Meaning the cheapest part gets thrown out first. I've always known that. There was a folder of printed emails. There were bank records showing 4 payments from a shell company in Delaware. There was a single page of instructions, typed, unsigned, listing 3 things to be done in order. Create the login. Place the drive. Wire the money. The shell company had 1 officer of record. The officer of record was a lawyer in Indianapolis who had incorporated 41 companies that year. 2 of them had wired money to Perry Slocum. Both were funded out of the same private account. The account belonged to Vanessa Sterling. Roman read it in his office with the door shut and did not make a sound. Then Dane said the thing he had been holding. There's one more document. It isn't from Slocum. Where's it from? Legal. It was in the separation file the whole time. It's why nobody ever reopened this. He set down a photocopy of a single page. It was a statement of admission. 4 short paragraphs. Accepting responsibility for the disclosure of confidential bid material, waiving any claim against the company, and agreeing not to contest the internal finding. At the bottom was her signature. The date on it was 9 days before the separation agreement. Roman put both hands flat on the desk. She signed this. She signed it. Why would she sign it? Dane had the answer, because he had spent the night with the dates, because of what's stapled behind it. Behind it was a second page, and the second page was a draft criminal referral, prepared but never filed, naming Mara Vandiver, and 3 lines below her as the officer with signature authority over the compromised account, Roman Ashcroft. If she fought it, it went to the prosecutor, and you went with it. The room was quiet for a long time. She had not stayed silent because she was guilty. She had stayed silent because the only way to keep him out of it was to be guilty. She had signed her name to it. A signature cannot be taken back afterward by telling the truth. For 12 years he had told himself that innocent people fight. She had not fought because he was standing behind her. Vanessa moved on the Monday. She did not go to the warehouse. She went to a phone. The carrier for the Ashcroft Group plan had 2 lines. One was for providers. One was for reporting fraud. She used the second one. She gave a member identification number and a subscriber name. Then she gave a concern, stated carefully, that the member had obtained employment under a materially false record. She suggested the pending authorization ought to be reviewed before it was honored. It took the carrier 4 working hours to suspend the authorization. It took human resources 1 working hour to open a file. Mara was pulled off the West Dock at 11 in the morning on day 89. They were not unkind about it. The woman from the agency drove out and sat with her in a room with a table in it. I have to read this out. I'm sorry. Go ahead. She read from a printed page. The words were misrepresentation of prior employment. The effect of the words was that the assignment ended that day. Do you want to say anything? I can write it in. Would it change? No. Mara looked at the table. Then no. She handed back the badge. She handed back the locker key. She asked one question. Does the coverage start? I'm sorry? 90 days. Today is 89. Does it start? The woman looked at her page. Then she looked at the table. No. Not at all? Not the part that's already? No. It's eligibility. It's a switch, not a scale. Mara nodded once and stood up. All right. The surgery was scheduled for the following Thursday. The hospital called her at 2 in the afternoon to move it, which was the word they used. Move it to when? Scheduling follows reinstatement, ma'am. Reinstatement of what? She had pulled over onto the shoulder by then. The authorization was withdrawn. By who? I don't have that on my screen. She drove to the hospital anyway, because Jonah had a preoperative appointment at 4. She had not worked out how to tell him yet. They took him in and weighed him, and measured him, and let him carry his own paperwork. At the desk on the way out, the woman behind the glass turned her screen a few degrees. She said the sentence she had clearly said before to other people. It's showing as not covered. Do you want to reschedule, or do you want to speak to financial counseling? Mara stood at the window with her son beside her and her coat over her arm. I'll call. Ma'am, if you want, I can. I'll call. Thank you. In the parking structure, she got him into the car and shut his door. Then she walked around to the driver's side and stood there with her hand on the roof. Jonah watched her through the windshield. She got in and started the engine and put her sunglasses on. It was February. There was no sun. Are we going home? Yes. Is it Thursday still? She put both hands on the wheel. They're going to call us about Thursday. Okay. He accepted it because he was 11 and because she had never once lied to him before. Dane found out about the termination at 6 that evening. He had asked a supervisor to tell him if anything at all happened to that assignment. He called from the car. They let her go this morning. On what grounds? Prior employment. It came out of a rescreen. Roman had not moved from the doorway. Who ordered the rescreen? Human Resources. At a suggestion. Whose suggestion? There was a pause on the line. I'd rather show you than say it. Roman listened to the rest of it, standing in his own kitchen with his coat still on. There's more. The insurance authorization for the boy was suspended on Monday. Suspended by whom? A fraud report. Called in to the carrier. He set the keys down very carefully. Who called the carrier? The report came in on a member line. The carrier won't give me the caller. Then get it from our side. The group plan was administered under the company's own contract. The company had a right to the call log. The call had come from a mobile number on the family account. Roman sat down on the arm of a chair in his own house. He looked at the number for a while. Then he did 3 things in one evening, in an order he had thought about on the drive home. He called the general counsel first. I need a referral to the United States Attorney. Insurance fraud, wire fraud, falsification of an internal investigation against the third party, against a named individual. She stopped writing. He could hear it. Roman, give me the name. He gave her the name. The silence on the line went on a long time. You understand what this does to the March finances. I understand what it does. He called the carrier's fraud unit himself and told them the report they had received was false. He told them he was the plan sponsor and that he would put it in writing within the hour. Then he called his father-in-law. Alden Sterling was 71. He had put $400 million into a company because his daughter asked him to, and he had never asked her why. In 9 years, he and Roman had eaten at the same table 200 times. The call took 11 minutes. For 9 of them, Sterling did not speak at all. You're certain? I have her account paying the man who built the file. That could be anything. Roman closed his eyes. I have her voice on a fraud line on Monday morning. Sterling took a breath. If this goes to a prosecutor, it touches 4 of my subsidiaries. It does. The old man let a long moment go by. You know what I'm asking you. I do. Then say no to me properly. Roman stood up. A woman lost 12 years. A boy is not getting an operation on Thursday. I'm not going to hold it. Sterling breathed out. No, you're not. He called back on the Wednesday morning. Sterling Holdings would cooperate fully. It would not be retaining counsel jointly with his daughter. That was all he said, except for one sentence at the end that Roman did not repeat to anybody. I have nothing to say for myself as her father. The authorization was reinstated at 10:40 on Wednesday. It was not reinstated because of any of that. It was reinstated because a plan sponsor withdrew a fraud report in writing, and a carrier supervisor in Ohio pushed it back through in under an hour. The hospital called Mara at 11. She was in a laundromat on 9th Street with a bag of Jonah's clothes on her knees. Say that again? Thursday is confirmed, ma'am. She stood up with the bag still in her arms. Say it one more time, please. The operation took 5 hours and 10 minutes. Mara sat in the second row of chairs by the window. Roman sat 2 seats away, because she had told him at the door that he could stay, and had not told him anything else. Neither of them spoke for most of it. At the 4th hour, she said something without turning her head. He does a thing with his nose when he's thinking. I know. I saw. He's done it since he was 2. I never knew where it came from. Roman looked at his own hand. It came from me. The surgeon came out at 2:10. Are you the mother? Yes. Roman stood up and then did not know what to do with himself. It went the way we wanted. The valve is clean and he's holding his own pressures. Say the first part again. It went the way we wanted. Mara put both hands over her mouth and made no sound at all. By then, that was the only way she knew how. Eleanor Ashcroft came on the Sunday. She was 72. She came up the corridor slowly with a bag of oranges. She had not been able to think of anything else to bring. She stood in the doorway a long time before she went in. Mara. Mrs. Ashcroft, I asked what your family did in a courthouse, in front of a clerk. She set the bag down on the chair because her hands were not steady. I decided who you were in about 9 seconds, and then I spent 12 years being right about it, and I was wrong the entire time. I don't know what a person does with that. Mara did not answer quickly. I'm not able to tell you it's all right. No, but he has a grandmother. That part I can give you. Eleanor nodded once. She sat down in the chair with the oranges still in it. Then she stood up again and moved them. That was the whole of it. The company issued a correction on the Tuesday. It was 4 sentences long. It said the finding of 12 years earlier had been built on falsified evidence. It said the finding was withdrawn in full. It apologized without reservation to Ms. Mara Vandiver. Roman read it to the floor himself at the shift change, standing on a pallet under the lights. And 1,100 people heard the name. Afterward, he found her in the corridor outside the ward. I keep trying to say I'm sorry, and it keeps coming out as an explanation. I know. I had 3 pieces of paper, and I had your face, and I picked the paper. She shook her head slowly. That isn't it. She looked at him then, properly, for the first time since the warehouse floor. You didn't choose the evidence over me. You chose being sure. That's the same thing. It isn't. She folded her arms. You've always wanted to be sure. And there was no way on earth to be sure of me. No, there wasn't. So you took the thing you could count. He did not argue with her. I'd give it back if there were a way to. There isn't one. She said it without any anger at all, which was worse. That's what it cost. Vanessa Sterling was indicted that autumn on 9 counts. The trial ran 11 days. Perry Slocum testified for the government and was sentenced on a reduced count. The judge said something in open court about the records he had kept in a garage. She said they were the only reason the case existed. Roman did not attend the sentencing. He was told about it afterward. He offered Mara her position back, at the level she would have reached with the 12 years paid. She said no to the position and yes to the 12 years, and she used it to buy a lease. A year later, there was a place across the road from the Ashcroft gate. with 8 tables in it. It opened at 4 in the morning and closed at 1 in the afternoon, because that is when the night shift eats. The sign said, Vandivers. Roman was there most mornings before 6. He sat at the end of the counter and had eggs and did not get special treatment, which took her about 2 weeks to enforce, and then it was settled. You know there are people who think the chairman eats here to look humble. Let them. She refilled his cup without being asked. It's the eggs, isn't it? It's the egg. She wiped the counter in front of him. You could learn to make them. I'd rather owe you for them. Jonah did his homework in the corner booth after school. He was 12 and cleared for everything, and taller by 4 inches. He called Roman by his first name for 8 months. Then one afternoon in the spring, he was carrying 2 crates in from the car. He said it over his shoulder without stopping. It was said the way a thing is said, when it has already been decided somewhere private. Dad, get the door. Roman got the door. He did not say anything about it, then or later. Neither did Mara, but she turned around at the grill and stayed turned around for a while. On the last night of that year, he waited. The tables came down. The lights went off in the front. He did not have a ring. He put his hand on the counter, palm up, and left it there. 12 years ago, I gave you a ring and told you I'd stand behind you. I'm not going to promise that again. I'd like to try earning it. She looked at his open hand. How long would that take? As long as it takes. That isn't an answer, Roman. It's the only one there is. She looked at the hand for a long time after that. Then she put her own hand into it, and it was rough, and it was hard across the knuckles, and it was the hand of a woman who had carried a boy through 11 years on her own. The next morning, there was a note under his coffee cup. 2 words. Be well. Now let me ask you something. What would you have done, standing on that warehouse floor at 5 in the morning, holding a piece of paper you had no right to read? Tell me down in the comments. I read every one. Rest easy now. There will be another one waiting the next time you come this way.